Ellie Thompson's worn leather jacket looked completely out of place among the gleaming military vehicles parked outside Charleston Air Force Base at 6:30 a.m. on what would become the most extraordinary Tuesday in aviation history. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her faded jeans and sturdy work boots suggested someone more comfortable in a garage than a military installation. The morning South Carolina humidity already pressed down like a wet blanket, and dark clouds gathering on the horizon promised the kind of weather that grounded aircraft and sent sensible people indoors. Security specialist Marcus Webb barely glanced up from his checkpoint duties as Ellie approached the main gate. His expression carried the weary patience of someone who processed dozens of civilian contractors every week, most of whom seemed perpetually lost and confused by military protocol. The base buzzed with the controlled energy of an installation preparing for emergency operations, as weather reports confirmed that Hurricane Delilah was tracking directly toward the coast with unprecedented intensity. "Morning, ma'am. Purpose of your visit?" Webb's tone suggested he was already mentally filling out standard visitor paperwork before Ellie had even answered. "I'm here to consult on C-17 maintenance issues," Ellie replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 40 years around aircraft. She fumbled through a worn leather purse, producing consulting credentials that identified her as a retired aircraft mechanic from a civilian cargo company. The base had requested technical assistance with some vintage systems that had been causing problems. Webb accepted the paperwork with the cursory attention of someone who had processed similar requests countless times. The credentials appeared. Routine because they were, though the story they supported was carefully constructed around fragments of truth. Eleanor Thompson had indeed worked as an aircraft mechanic, though that had been her cover identity during classified test pilot programs that officially didn't exist. Her real expertise exceeded anything documented in civilian records. "Visitor badge is good for 8 hours, ma'am," Webb said, stamping the authorization with bureaucratic efficiency. "Report to Building 7 for escort assignment. Mind the weather advisories. We're expecting some nasty conditions later today." His casual dismissal suggested that elderly civilian consultants ranked somewhere below routine paperwork on his attention scale. Ellie clipped the visitor badge to her jacket with hands that showed the calluses and scars of someone who had spent decades working with heavy machinery. What Webb couldn't see was how those same hands had once guided prototype aircraft through test flights that pushed the boundaries of aeronautical engineering. The slight tremor that appeared to be age-related nervousness was actually the barely controlled anticipation of someone returning to work she had been born to do. The walk to Building 7 took Ellie past the massive hangars where C-17 Globemaster III aircraft waited like sleeping giants. Each transport measured over 170 feet in length, with wings spanning nearly the same distance, and cargo bays capable of carrying everything from humanitarian supplies to main battle tanks. Ellie's pace appeared unhurried, but her eyes catalogued every detail with the professional assessment of someone who understood that aircraft maintenance could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Master Sergeant Rico Valdez emerged from Hangar Charlie just as Ellie reached the maintenance coordination office. His flight suit bore patches indicating decades of experience with heavy cargo aircraft, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to solving complex technical problems under pressure. The sight of an elderly civilian woman approaching his domain triggered the protective skepticism that experienced mechanics developed toward outsiders who claimed to understand their work. "You must be the consultant they sent about the maintenance issues," Valdez said, his tone walking the line between professional courtesy and barely concealed irritation. "I have to tell you, ma'am, these aren't vintage systems. The C-17 represents the most advanced cargo aircraft technology in the world, and our maintenance procedures follow cutting-edge protocols that civilian mechanics might find challenging." Ellie nodded with appropriate deference while mentally noting that Valdez's defensive attitude suggested someone hiding problems rather than solving them. "I appreciate your expertise, Sergeant. I'm just here to offer a second opinion on some specific technical concerns that have been raised." Her voice carried the humility of someone acknowledging superior knowledge, though her eyes were already identifying maintenance shortcuts that violated every safety protocol she remembered. The maintenance bay where Valdez led her contained a C-17 undergoing what appeared to be routine inspection, though Ellie's trained eye immediately spotted irregularities that would have triggered investigation in any properly supervised facility. Stress fractures in critical load-bearing components had been cosmetically concealed rather than properly repaired. Safety wire that should have secured vital connections was missing or improperly installed. Most concerning, the documentation suggested that these shortcuts represented systematic patterns rather than isolated incidents. As you can see, Valdez explained with the confidence of someone who believed his audience lacked the knowledge to question his methods, everything meets current Air Force standards. These aircraft are maintained to the highest specifications, and our safety record speaks for itself. His gesture encompassed equipment worth over $200 million, representing American aerospace engineering at its finest. But as Ellie's examination continued, she began to see patterns that chilled her to the bone. These weren't just shortcuts. They were the exact same types of maintenance failures that had killed her son, Captain David Thompson, 6 months earlier. The official investigation had concluded that his crash resulted from unforeseeable equipment failure, but standing here, seeing the systematic negligence with her own eyes, Ellie realized the truth was far more sinister. Someone was cutting corners to meet impossible schedules, and air crews were paying the price. The next morning brought more evidence of the maintenance nightmare that Ellie was uncovering. Sergeant Valdez had reluctantly agreed to show her additional aircraft, though his increasingly defensive posture suggested someone growing uncomfortable with her technical questions. As they walked through Hangar Delta, Ellie's trained eye caught details that painted a disturbing picture of systematic negligence. "This aircraft completed a major inspection last week," Valdez explained, stopping beside a C-17 that bore fresh maintenance stickers. "Full structural examination, engine overhaul, the works. Cost the taxpayers nearly $500,000, but that's what it takes to keep these birds airworthy." Ellie approached the starboard engine nacelle with careful steps, her arthritis requiring deliberate movement. What she found made her stomach clench with professional horror. The engine mount bolts showed stress patterns indicating they were operating beyond safe parameters, and the torque specifications painted on the bolt heads had been altered to hide the fact that they hadn't been properly tightened. "Sergeant, these engine mounts appear to have incorrect torque values," Ellie observed, keeping her voice neutral despite the rage building inside her. "Has this aircraft experienced any unusual vibration during flight operations?" Valdez's response came too quickly, with the defensive edge of someone whose carefully constructed facade was being questioned. "Ma'am, those torque specifications are current according to the latest technical orders. What might appear concerning to civilian mechanics represents normal variation in military maintenance procedures." But Ellie had helped write those technical orders during her classified service, and she knew exactly what the correct specifications should be. More importantly, she recognized the pattern of failures that had led to her son's death. The stress fractures, the improper torque values, the missing safety wire, all were identical to the maintenance issues found in David's crashed aircraft. The arrival of Major Derek Stone interrupted what was becoming a tense technical discussion. His flight suit displayed an impressive array of patches and ribbons, indicating successful completion of advanced training programs, and his confident stride marked him as someone accustomed to immediate respect. However, Ellie noticed something that Valdez had missed. Stone's eyes held the calculating look of someone who was more concerned with career advancement than flight safety. "Sergeant Valdez, I need a status update on aircraft readiness," Stone announced, his voice carrying crisp authority. His glance toward Ellie suggested mild curiosity about civilian presence in a restricted maintenance area. "Higher headquarters is asking questions about our mission capability rates, and I need current numbers," Valdez snapped to attention. "Sir, all assigned aircraft are mission-ready according to current specifications. We have one C-17 completing routine maintenance, but it will be available for operations by 1100 hours if required." Stone's satisfied nod indicated acceptance of the report, though his eyes lingered on Ellie with growing curiosity. "Ma'am, I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Major Stone, Squadron Operations Officer. Are you here for some kind of inspection or evaluation?" Ellie straightened slightly, her demeanor shifting to convey appropriate respect for military authority while maintaining the humble confusion of a civilian consultant. "Major, I'm Eleanor Thompson. I was asked to provide technical consultation on some maintenance procedures that have been questioned by higher headquarters." Nothing formal, just a second opinion from someone with experience in aircraft systems. Stone's expression relaxed slightly, though something in his posture suggested ongoing wariness. "Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate your expertise, but I want to assure you that this squadron maintains the highest standards in the Air Force. Our pilots and maintenance personnel represent the best trained professionals in military aviation." What Stone didn't know was that Ellie had already identified enough maintenance violations to ground half his fleet. More critically, she was beginning to understand that the systematic negligence wasn't the result of incompetence. It was deliberate. Cost-cutting designed to meet impossible operational schedules while maximizing performance metrics that enhanced careers. As the morning progressed, Ellie discovered maintenance logs that had been falsified to show work that hadn't been performed, inspection reports that ignored critical deficiencies, and replacement parts that were being reused beyond their service life. The pattern was clear. Someone was prioritizing mission readiness statistics over aircrew safety, and the results were predictably deadly. The most damning evidence came when Ellie managed to access the maintenance history for her son's aircraft. The record showed that David's C-17 had been inspected at Charleston Air Force Base just 2 weeks before the crash, with Major Stone's signature approving the aircraft for return to service despite documented deficiencies that should have grounded it immediately. Her son had died because someone had been more concerned with meeting deadlines than following safety procedures. By Wednesday morning, Hurricane Delilah had intensified beyond all predictions, threatening to become the most powerful storm to hit the South Carolina coast in decades. The Base Emergency Operations Center buzzed with controlled chaos as meteorologists provided updates that grew progressively more alarming. Sustained winds now exceeded 140 millimeters, and the storm's unexpected acceleration meant that forward units scheduled for routine evacuation now faced potential disaster. Ellie had positioned herself in an unobtrusive corner of the operations center, maintaining her cover as a civilian consultant while monitoring the emergency response. Her investigation had confirmed her worst fears about systematic maintenance problems, but she needed proof that would satisfy military prosecutors rather than just her own professional judgment. General Patricia Hayes stood at the center of the activity, her expression grim as she processed reports from subordinate commands throughout the affected region. 12 M1 Abrams main battle tanks and their crews are stranded at Forward Operating Base Ranger, she announced to the assembled staff. The tanks represent nearly $50 million in equipment, but more importantly, 60 personnel are at risk if evacuation can't be accomplished before the hurricane's full force arrives. The meteorology officer's report was stark and unforgiving. "General, we have a 90-minute window before conditions become completely impossible. After that, winds will exceed aircraft operational limits, and visibility will drop to 0. Any transport mission must launch immediately or wait for the storm to pass completely." Major Stone stepped forward with the aggressive confidence that had earned him leadership positions throughout his career. "General Hayes, I can handle the mission. My crew has flown cargo operations in severe weather conditions, and we understand the risks involved. The C-17 can handle the cargo load, and we have the skills necessary to complete evacuation before the weather window closes." Ellie felt her blood run cold as she listened to Stone's proposal. She had examined the aircraft he would be flying, and she knew that the maintenance shortcuts she had discovered made it unsuitable for normal operations, let alone a mission through hurricane-force winds. The stress fractures in the wing spars, the improperly torqued engine mounts, the missing safety wire all represented failure points that could prove catastrophic under extreme conditions. Dr. Amanda Walsh, the base's senior flight engineer, stepped forward with technical concerns that reflected her own growing unease. "General, the cargo weight distribution will push our aircraft to maximum performance limits even under normal conditions. With the weather factors we're facing, we'll be operating beyond established safety parameters." Stone's response revealed the kind of aggressive leadership that had earned him recognition, though it also suggested someone whose confidence exceeded his actual capabilities. Dr. Walsh, challenging missions require taking calculated risks. The C-17 was designed for exactly this kind of operation, and proper piloting techniques can compensate for adverse conditions. The silence that followed Dr. Walsh's assessment stretched long enough for everyone present to understand the stakes involved. 60 lives balanced against weather conditions that exceeded safe operational limits, with equipment worth $50 million hanging in the balance. General Hayes, faced the kind of command decision that could define careers regardless of the outcome. Ellie recognized this as the moment when her investigation would transform from gathering evidence to preventing additional deaths. Stone's willingness to attempt the mission was admirable, but his aircraft wasn't airworthy, and his technical understanding was insufficient for conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Without intervention, the mission would likely result in aircraft loss and catastrophic casualties, exactly the kind of preventable tragedy that had killed her son. The opportunity for justice had arrived wrapped in hurricane winds and impossible odds. "General Hayes," Ellie said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension with calm certainty, "I can fly it." The reaction was immediate, explosive, and completely predictable. 30 elite military aviators burst into laughter at the sight of an elderly civilian woman claiming she could accomplish what their most experienced pilots weren't certain they could achieve. Stone's laughter was loudest of all, echoing across the operations center with the kind of derision that military professionals reserved for civilians who clearly didn't understand their limitations. "Ma'am," Stone managed between bursts of laughter, "this is a C-17 Globemaster III, not a recreational aircraft. We're talking about flying 12 main battle tanks through hurricane-force winds with zero visibility. This requires the highest level of military pilot training and years of heavy cargo experience." But as Ellie stood quietly in the center of the laughter, her posture straight and her expression calm, something in her bearing began to register with the more observant personnel in the room. The confidence wasn't the delusional bravado of someone who didn't understand the situation. It was the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of accomplishing. Ellie waited for the laughter to subside before responding, with words that would transform everything that followed. "Major Stone, I understand the aircraft's capabilities in severe weather conditions better than you might expect," she said, her voice carrying authority that hadn't been present during her earlier civilian interactions. "I also understand that your current approach to this mission will likely result in aircraft loss and personnel casualties that could be avoided with proper techniques." The laughter died instantly as everyone present processed the transformation in Ellie's demeanor and the technical specificity of her statement. Dr. Walsh stared at her with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality had just been challenged, while Stone's face showed the particular alarm that comes with recognizing that carefully maintained illusions might be crumbling. General Hayes stepped forward with the careful attention of someone whose command instincts had detected an anomaly worth investigating. "Mrs. Thompson, that's a very specific assessment of mission parameters. What exactly is your background? With heavy cargo aircraft and extreme weather operations?" Ellie's response would have sounded modest to anyone who didn't understand the technical implications of what she was describing. "General, I have some experience with C-17 operations and storm flying techniques that might be applicable to current conditions. With your permission, I'd like to demonstrate my qualifications for handling this particular mission." Stone's objection was immediate and vehement, though his words carried undertones of panic that suggested someone whose carefully constructed image was under serious threat. "General Hayes, we cannot seriously consider allowing a civilian consultant to attempt a mission that challenges our most experienced military pilots. This is exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that gets people killed." "Major Stone," Ellie interrupted with gentle firmness, "before you dismiss my capabilities, perhaps you should verify my credentials more thoroughly than your initial assessment suggested." She reached into her worn leather purse with deliberate slowness, producing a government identification card that she placed on the nearest desk. Sergeant Santos, who had been monitoring communications equipment throughout the emergency discussions, picked up Ellie's credentials and scanned them through. "The base security system." Her expression shifted from routine verification to confusion, then to something approaching awe as classification levels far beyond her clearance appeared on her computer screen. "General Hayes," Santos said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mrs. Thompson's credentials show military clearances that are classified above our access level. The system is requesting verification through Pentagon Aviation Command for someone designated as Thunder Protocol Executive Flight Authority." The silence that followed was complete and profound. Every person in the operations center understood. The Thunder Protocol designation was legendary within aviation circles, representing test pilots whose capabilities exceeded normal military parameters and whose achievements remained classified decades after their completion. Stone's reaction was immediate and telling, his face drained of color as he recognized the implications of Thunder Protocol authorization, and his confident posture collapsed as he realized that his dismissive attitude toward Ellie might have been the most serious error of his military career. General Hayes moved to examine Ellie's credentials personally, her expression shifting from skepticism to professional respect as she processed the authorization levels displayed on the security system. "Mrs. Thompson, if these credentials are authentic, then you possess flight authority that exceeds mine in matters involving experimental aircraft and extreme conditions operations." Ellie removed her reading glasses and straightened to her full height. Her entire demeanor transformed as decades of carefully maintained cover identity fell away like discarded clothing. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command responsibilities in the highest stakes situations imaginable. "General Hayes, contact Pentagon Aviation Command and request immediate verification for Colonel Eleanor Thompson, designated call sign Thunder 7. Inform them that Thunder 7 is requesting operational authority for emergency heavy cargo. Transport in extreme weather conditions." The transformation was remarkable and complete. The confused civilian consultant disappeared, replaced by someone whose bearing and voice commanded immediate respect from everyone present. Stone stared at her with the expression of someone watching their professional world collapse around them, while Dr. Walsh initiated the verification request with hands that shook slightly as she processed the possibility that she had been dismissing. One of the most legendary pilots in aviation history, the response from Pentagon Aviation Command was immediate and unambiguous. Colonel Eleanor Thompson was authorized for any flight operations necessary to protect American lives and all military personnel were directed to provide complete cooperation with her directives. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hayes announced, her voice carrying the weight of someone whose understanding of the situation had fundamentally changed, "you are in the presence of Colonel Eleanor Thompson, whose service record includes setting every heavy cargo transport record currently used by the United States Air Force. Colonel Thompson, what do you need from us?" Ellie moved toward the flight operations desk with the fluid confidence of someone returning to familiar territory after a brief absence. Her transformation from elderly consultant to commanding officer was so complete that several personnel had to remind themselves that this was the same person they had been dismissing moments earlier. "First, I need current meteorological data and real-time storm tracking information," Ellie explained as she reviewed weather displays with obvious familiarity. "Second, I need the cargo manifest and weight distribution calculations for 12 M1 Abrams tanks. Third, I need a crew chief who understands that we're about to push this aircraft beyond normal operational limits." Stone made one final, desperate attempt to maintain some control over the situation that was rapidly spinning beyond his ability to influence. "Colonel Thompson, with respect, these weather conditions exceed safe operational parameters for any pilot regardless of experience level. Perhaps we should coordinate with specialized rescue units rather than attempting an operation that could result in additional casualties." Ellie paused in her preparation to fix Stone with a stare that had once reduced experienced test pilots to nervous silence during safety briefings. "Major Stone, I've been flying heavy cargo aircraft through severe weather since before you were born. The techniques required for this mission were developed during classified programs that you don't have clearance to discuss. Your concern for safety is noted, but this mission is well within my capabilities." The preparation for Ellie's mission proceeded with military efficiency as personnel who had been skeptical of her abilities moments earlier now competed to provide the best possible support for someone whose legendary status was being confirmed. Through every action she took, her pre-flight inspection revealed knowledge of aircraft systems that exceeded that of the base's most experienced crews, and her mission planning demonstrated understanding of weather flying techniques that weren't taught in current training programs. But as Ellie conducted her inspection, she made a deliberate decision that would expose the corruption she had been investigating. "Major Stone, I need to examine the aircraft maintenance records for the C-17 we'll be using. Specifically, I want to review the stress analysis reports for the wing spars and engine mounts." Stone's reaction was immediate and telling. "Colonel, those records are routine maintenance documents. I'm sure they're all in order according to current specifications. I'm sure they are, Ellie replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nevertheless, I insist on reviewing them before risking the lives of 60 personnel on aircraft maintenance that I haven't personally verified. The maintenance records that Stone reluctantly produced told the story that Ellie had been piecing together for months. Falsified inspection reports, shortcuts that violated basic safety protocols, and systematic negligence that had been covered up through bureaucratic manipulation. More damning, the same patterns appeared in the maintenance history of her son's crashed aircraft. Major Stone, Ellie said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. These maintenance records indicate systematic safety violations that have rendered this aircraft unfit for normal operations, let alone extreme weather missions. As the pilot in command, I'm grounding this aircraft until proper repairs can be completed. The silence that followed was profound as everyone present realized they were witnessing the exposure of corruption that had been hidden for months. Stone's face showed the particular desperation of someone whose career was collapsing in real time. Colonel Thompson, you can't ground operational aircraft based on routine maintenance variations, Stone protested, though his voice lacked conviction. These aircraft meet all current Air Force specifications. Major, these aircraft meet the specifications you've been approving, which differ significantly from actual Air Force standards, Ellie replied. She turned to address General Hayes directly. General, I recommend immediate investigation of maintenance practices throughout this command. The safety violations I've documented represent systematic negligence that threatens every aircrew in this squadron. General Hayes studied the maintenance records with growing alarm as she processed the implications of what Ellie was revealing. Colonel Thompson, are you suggesting that Major Stone has been deliberately approving substandard maintenance to meet operational schedules? General, I'm stating that Major Stone has been systematically approving maintenance procedures that violate established safety protocols, and that these same violations contributed to the crash that killed Captain David Thompson 6 months ago. Ellie's voice remained calm and professional, though everyone present could hear the underlying steel. My son died because someone prioritized career advancement over aircrew safety. The revelation hit the operations center like a physical blow. Personnel who had been focused on the rescue mission suddenly understood they were witnessing the exposure of corruption that had claimed lives. Stone's reaction confirmed everything. His face showed not surprise, but the particular fear of someone whose secrets had been discovered. Colonel Thompson, Stone began, but Ellie cut him off with a gesture that carried absolute authority. Major Stone, you are relieved of operational duties pending investigation. General Hayes, I recommend immediate security escort for Major Stone and preservation of all maintenance records as evidence. The arrest of Major Stone proceeded with military efficiency, though his attempts to deny responsibility crumbled when confronted with the evidence that Ellie had systematically gathered. Security personnel escorted him from the operations center while investigators began securing maintenance records that would form the foundation of court-martial proceedings. General Hayes, Ellie continued, we still have 60 personnel at risk who need immediate evacuation. I recommend using C-17 tail number 445, which completed proper maintenance last month under supervision that I trust. The aircraft is airworthy for extreme weather operations if handled with appropriate techniques. General Hayes nodded grimly. Colonel Thompson, given the circumstances, I'm placing you in full operational command of this rescue mission. What? Do you need to ensure success? The preparation for the actual rescue mission showcased why Ellie had earned legendary status among military aviators. Her pre-flight inspection was meticulous, identifying and correcting minor issues that other pilots might have overlooked. Her weather analysis demonstrated understanding of storm patterns that exceeded the capabilities of the base meteorology staff. Most importantly, her crew briefing revealed techniques for extreme weather flying that existed nowhere in current training manuals. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a young pilot who had been observing the proceedings with fascination, approached Ellie during the final preparation phases. Colonel Thompson, I've studied your techniques in advanced training programs, but I never imagined I'd have the opportunity to observe them being applied in actual operations. Is there anything specific we should document for future training purposes? Ellie smiled with the warmth of someone who appreciated professional curiosity from younger pilots eager to learn from experience. Captain Rodriguez, the most important lesson is that aircraft capabilities often exceed the limitations that safety margins impose under normal conditions. Understanding how to safely push those boundaries requires experience that can't be gained from simulators or textbooks. The takeoff proceeded despite weather conditions that would have grounded civilian aircraft hours earlier, Ellie guided. The massive C-17 threw crosswinds that exceeded 70 mph with the smooth precision of someone who understood that the aircraft wanted to fly if handled with proper technique. Her radio communications maintained professional calm that provided confidence to ground control personnel monitoring what everyone understood was an extraordinarily dangerous mission. Charleston Tower, Thunder 7 departing runway 18, requesting direct routing to landing zone Alpha. Ellie's voice carried across the radio frequencies with authority that transformed the entire operation from desperate emergency to routine mission execution. The flight to the stranded tank unit took Ellie through the leading edge of Hurricane Delilah, where she demonstrated storm-flying techniques that amazed everyone monitoring her progress. She used wind patterns that would have destroyed lesser pilots, finding calm air pockets within the chaos that allowed steady progress toward her destination, while other aircraft remained grounded throughout the region. The landing zone where the tanks waited was a nightmare of wind and rain that challenged the limits of human perception. Visibility measured in feet rather than miles, and wind gusts exceeded 90 mph as Ellie approached what appeared to be an impossible landing situation. The tank crews who had been preparing for potential capture or abandonment watched in disbelief as the massive transport aircraft materialized from the storm like some technological miracle. Ellie's approach technique violated every current regulation about safe landing procedures, but her execution was so flawless that the watching personnel couldn't distinguish where innovation ended and magic began. She used the hurricane winds themselves to provide additional lift during critical phases of approach, compensating for cargo weight through methods that existed nowhere in current flight manuals. The loading of 12 M1 Abrams tanks proceeded, with urgency driven by hurricane winds that were increasing in intensity every minute. Ellie coordinated the operation from her cockpit, providing guidance that ensured optimal weight distribution while maintaining aircraft balance parameters that prevented dangerous shifts during the loading process. Loadmaster, this is Thunder 7. Ellie's voice carried through the aircraft communication system with professional calm, despite conditions that would have terrified experienced pilots. Monitor center of gravity continuously during loading. We're operating at maximum parameters, and any shift could create unrecoverable control problems during takeoff. The return flight showcased Ellie's legendary skills through weather conditions that pushed both aircraft and pilot to absolute limits of performance. She navigated through hurricane winds that exceeded 100 mph, maintaining course accuracy that impressed air traffic controllers, monitoring her progress from hundreds of miles away. More importantly, her smooth flying kept the tank cargo stable throughout turbulence that would have shifted improperly secured loads and created fatal control problems. Charleston Tower, Thunder 7 with full cargo load, Ellie reported as the C-17 carved its way through skies that no other pilot would have attempted to challenge. Estimating arrival in 90 minutes, request priority approach clearance and emergency services standing by. The landing at Charleston Air Force Base was so precise that observers couldn't determine the exact moment when the aircraft's wheels touched the runway. Ellie guided the massive transport through crosswinds that should have made landing impossible, using techniques that demonstrated why she had earned legendary status among military aviators worldwide. As the engines wound down and cargo operations began unloading the rescued tanks, General Hayes approached the aircraft with an expression that combined professional respect with personal amazement. "Colonel Thompson, you've just accomplished what our meteorologists said was impossible. How do we even begin to document this mission for official records?" Ellie climbed down from the cockpit with the careful movements of someone whose arthritis reminded her that heroic missions carried physical costs regardless of pilot skill levels. "General Hayes, document it as a successful emergency evacuation conducted using advanced weather flying techniques. The specific methods used are classified, but the results speak for themselves." The debriefing that followed revealed the complete scope of Ellie's investigation, and the devastating truth about maintenance practices that had been hiding behind bureaucratic cover. Military investigators who had been summoned to address what was becoming a major scandal listened with growing alarm as Ellie presented evidence of systematic corruption that had threatened air crews throughout the command. Major Stone has been deliberately ignoring safety violations to maintain operational schedules that enhance his performance evaluations, Ellie explained to investigators who understood they were dealing with a case that would have implications throughout the Air Force. His negligence directly contributed to the accident that killed Captain David Thompson and 3 other airmen 6 months ago. The evidence that Ellie presented was comprehensive and damning. Maintenance records had been falsified to conceal shortcuts, safety inspections had been signed off without being performed, and aircraft had been cleared for operations despite known deficiencies that violated basic airworthiness standards. The pattern revealed systematic corruption that had placed hundreds of aircrews at risk over an extended period. Stone's attempts to deny responsibility were pathetic and futile. Confronted with documentation that proved his guilt beyond reasonable doubt, his defenses crumbled as investigators assembled a case that would result in court-martial, disgrace, and imprisonment. His career was destroyed, but more importantly, the maintenance practices that had killed David Thompson would be corrected before they could claim additional lives. The cultural changes that followed Ellie's demonstration extended far beyond Charleston Air Force Base. Military aviation commands throughout the world began implementing new protocols for assessing pilot capabilities that emphasize skill and experience over appearance and assumptions. Her mission became required study material for advanced pilot training, demonstrating that excellence in aviation transcended every boundary except the willingness to recognize it. Dr. Walsh approached Ellie during the final debriefing with the respect accorded to living legends. Colonel Thompson, the techniques you demonstrated during this mission, are they documented anywhere that we can access for training purposes? Ellie's response carried the weight of someone whose contributions to aviation would influence generations of pilots. Dr. Walsh, the techniques I used were developed during classified test programs, but the principles can be adapted for current training curricula. I'll work with your staff to develop appropriate instruction materials that maintain operational security while enhancing pilot capabilities. 3 months after the hurricane mission, the full scope of the corruption that Ellie had exposed became clear through court-martial proceedings that sent shockwaves throughout the military aviation community. Major Stone was sentenced to 15 years in military prison for negligent homicide, conspiracy to violate safety regulations, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. More importantly, 12 other officers and senior NCOs were court-martialed for their roles in the systematic maintenance failures that had claimed multiple lives. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in a $50 million settlement for the families of aircrews killed by preventable accidents, though. No amount of money could restore the lives that had been lost to corruption and negligence. The Air Force implemented comprehensive reforms to maintenance oversight procedures, ensuring that the shortcuts that had killed David Thompson could never again be hidden behind bureaucratic manipulation. Ellie returned to her quiet civilian life, carrying the satisfaction of knowing that her son's death had been avenged and that future aircrews would fly safer aircraft because of her actions. The memorial she planned for David could now include the complete truth about his service and sacrifice, honoring both his memory and the changes that his death had ultimately inspired. The base commander's office, where Ellie received her final briefing, was decorated with photographs of aircraft and pilots spanning decades of military aviation history. General Hayes presented her with official recognition for her role in the rescue mission, though both women understood that the real victory lay in the systematic changes that would protect future aircrews. Colonel Thompson, General Hayes said, as she presented the commendation, "Your actions during the hurricane rescue were remarkable, but your investigation of maintenance practices represents an even greater service to aviation safety. How many lives do you think you've saved through the reforms that resulted from your work?" Ellie accepted the recognition with the humility of someone who understood that true heroism lay not in dramatic gestures, but in persistent dedication to protecting others. "General, I hope I've saved enough lives to honor my son's memory. David died believing in the system that was supposed to protect him. By fixing that system, we ensure that his death contributed to something meaningful." The final irony was both devastating and perfect. Eleanor Thompson, legendary test pilot whose innovations had made modern heavy cargo transport possible, had been forced to sneak around her own former command, disguised as a civilian consultant, in order to investigate the corruption that had killed her child. The pilots who had dismissed her capabilities were flying aircraft whose performance parameters she had established, using techniques she had developed, while covering up the maintenance failures that had destroyed her family. Years later, when young pilots asked about the origins of storm-flying techniques that saved lives in impossible conditions, their instructors would tell them about Thunder 7, the pilot who proved that experience and skill matter more than age or appearance. Eleanor Thompson's legacy continued to influence aviation long after her final flight, reminding everyone that true expertise recognizes no limitations except those imposed by the willingness to let it emerge when lives depend on getting it right. The hurricane that had threatened to destroy lives and equipment had instead provided the opportunity for justice and redemption. Sometimes the storms that seem most destructive actually clear the air, washing away corruption and revealing the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic deception. In the end, the laughter that had greeted Ellie's simple declaration, "I can fly it," had been transformed into respectful silence as 30 elite pilots watched her accomplish the impossible, while simultaneously exposing the corruption that had cost so many lives. She had proven that legends never truly retire. They simply wait for the moment when their skills are needed most, then emerge from hiding to accomplish what others believe cannot be done. Thunder 7 had spoken, and the skies would never be the same. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.